The next pastor in the line of pastors who served our church, of course, was one of our very own, our pastor emeritus. That was Pastor Art Barnes. He was here, as we saw in the video, from 1987 to 2015. And we invited Pastor Art to share a few words with us as well. Pastor Art.
Thank you. I don't know what this guy's doing here. Let's get rid of him. I was given 5 minutes to speak. So let's fantasize together. How many of you think that's going to happen? I always get a real kick out of pastors when they close a service out or they pray before a meal. It happened tonight. Pastor Chris said, let's bow our heads in a word of prayer. So this might go a little bit more than 5 minutes, all right? But 175 years, that is absolutely tremendous. And I believe that God has put within our DNA the passion to celebrate longevity. I remember the very first time I ever celebrated longevity that I remember. My wife Christy and I were standing by the crib of our firstborn, our son Christopher, who in 3 weeks is going to turn 54 years old. But back in that day, when we were by that crib, he was 1 month old. And I remember being overwhelmed with emotion. And I put my arm around my young wife, and I said to her as we looked down at Christopher, I said, I can't believe it. We have kept him alive for 30 days. Do you remember those experiences? In 4 months, my wife and I will celebrate our 57th wedding anniversary. That applause was all for her. You see, we celebrate those kinds of things. We clap when people say things like that because we honor longevity. We celebrate it, don't we? But we are by no means the world's record. The world's record belongs to a couple in Canada back in the 1800s who were married for 88 years, 349 days. Now, I was curious. I looked up a chart that told you what to give for certain wedding anniversaries. Do you know what number 1 is? The old traditional one, paper. I have no idea why. The chart, however, only goes up to 75 years. And do you know what the 75th year is? It's a diamond. So now imagine this poor couple up in Canada who went to 88. And you say, that's off the chart. What do you give? What do you get? I know what some of you women are thinking. You get a bigger diamond. That's what you get for 88 years. Well, I'm 76 years old, and I have a neighbor in Florida who's 94. His name's Walter. And Walter is a great Christian man. His wife passed away, and when she passed on, he decided to let his hair grow. He's got this beautiful, I'm so jealous, he's got this beautiful white flowing hair. He looks like Moses. And he's a devout Christian man. So I remember a few years back when I turned 70, I thought that was a big deal. And so I said, hey, Walter, guess what? I'm 70. You know what Walter said? He said, oh, He said, well, I got socks older than you. Well, Walter may have socks older than me, but nobody has socks older than this church. 175 years. You know, what is the secret to that? How does a church last that long? And forgive me for saying this, because you're going to have to forgive me, because I believe the Holy Spirit's prompted me to say it. This church wasn't built by quitters. It's built by people who said, we're going to stay here and we're going to work it through. And you people sitting here tonight are the work it throughers. Give yourselves a hand. This is what longevity looks like in a church. I remember Ray Cush, the pastor of the West Springfield Baptist Church, from which I came to come here. And Ray said to me one day, he said, you know, Art, he said, sometimes it just feels like the church is hanging on by a thread. You ever feel that way, Pastor Chris? Well, I have. John, maybe some of you others. I've often thought, is that true? And even if it were true, you know who the thread is? The thread is Christ. And it wouldn't matter if that thread was the size of a spider web. This church would still go on, because God is the one who holds it together. That is biblical. It says that in Colossians chapter 1, verse 17. It says he holds all things together. God has held this church together for 175 years, along with all of the faithful people who have come before us. You see, we're all Johnny-come-latelys. I mean, I marveled at the fact that the first toilet was used in 1851, the flush toilet. I wonder if our church had one. I highly doubt it. But it was held together by the faithful. And here we are tonight, gathered here. Now, it was almost 40 years, it'll be 40 years ago in October, that Christy and I first stepped foot in the First Baptist Church of Linesville, and I came to preach John Ackland one Sunday. But John Ackland, you blame him for this. He met me at the back door after I preached, and he asked me that question that I shall never forget. What are you doing with the rest of your life? And that conversation and that encounter led to me being here for 28 years as a pastor. I've been retired for 11 years. So, John, if you were to ask me that question again tonight, Art, what are you doing with the rest of your life? Evidently, hanging out with you people. Which we love, and we love you. Now, I know what y'all been waiting for. You've been waiting for that 5 minutes to get done. You've been waiting for me to tell a couple of stories, and I got so many stories that I don't know which one to tell. But I'm going to share the funniest with you first. And some of her relation are here, so I'm not going to use her last name. But her first name was Marguerite. The family that's laughing, they're the ones that are related, okay? So, back in the day, way back in the early 90s, we decided to do some things a little bit differently. And there's a lady here tonight, Roberta Alexander back here. She helped start what she described to me years ago as vertical worship. I I said, what is vertical worship? Well, horizontal worship is when you sing about God, and vertical worship is when you sing to God. And the first time I ever heard it, I got all crazy inside. And I said, we have got to do this at our church. So I remember going to the diaconate, and we had an 8:30 service, and we had an 11 o'clock service. And I said to the diaconate, I said, I'd like to do some of this vertical worship stuff at 8:30. You know what they told me? Now, they all went to the 11 o'clock service. You know what they told me? They said, we don't care what you do at 8:30. Just don't mess with 11 o'clock. Okay. So that's what we did. Next thing I know, my phone rings. It's Marguerite. And Marguerite, and I'm not making fun of her, but I have to add this point to just give you a little bit of, depth. But she had jowls on her that were quite large. And when she swung her head to the left, the jowls followed only a little bit later. And then when she'd go to the right, they would arc their way back. So you kind of get the picture when she's talking to you on the phone of how it's going on the other end of the line. Right? Okay. So she calls me up and she says, Pastor, she says, I want to know what you're going to do about 8:30 service. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I hear that they're playing guitars and drums and tambourines, and they're raising their hands and clapping, and what is going on? What are you going to do about it? So, I prayed real quick, and I went to Psalm 148, 149, 150, and I gave her to her. It says, sing to the Lord a new song. Let him praise his name with dancing, and make music to him with tambourine and harp, and so on and so forth. And she said, that's Old Testament. She shot down my best argument. I thought, all right, I'll get her with this one. I said, Marguerite, okay, but listen. I said, we have 8:30 service for people who like that kind of style. And I said, then we have 11 o'clock service for people like you that enjoy that kind of worship. And she said on the other end of the line, I'll have you to know, Pastor, I don't come to church to enjoy it. Now, in all fairness, she's in heaven. She was a great saint, and that was just a funny story that came from her. But believe me, I'm going to see her again, and I'm going to pay for what I just said. That I'm sure of. What's the most emotional for me? That's very difficult. I couldn't even begin, hardly, but I'll share one. The young man's name was Mike, and he showed up at youth group in the old church, all dressed up in black and gothy looking, with two of his buddies, and they were all about 15, 16 years old. And they showed up, the door opened, and in they come, and everybody kind of looked at them like, oh, what's going on here? And they said, hello, what can we do for you? They said, oh, we're here from Satan, and we're going to put a curse on this church. That's what we're here for. We're going to put a curse on you. And our youth leader looked him right in the eye and says, you guys hungry? We got pizza. And they said, well, yeah, I guess we could stay for pizza. Now, fast forward a little more than 10 years. I'm up here preaching in the new church here. And somewhere over in this area, I look down, and there's Mike in his late 20s. Man, what's that about? So, as the days, Sundays went on, Mike kept coming, and he came to me one day, and he said, Pastor, I have received Christ as my Savior, and I want to be baptized. I told my wife, and she says, we got to call our youngest son, Michael, because he knew Mike really well in school. And she said, I'm going to ask him, who do you think the last person on the face of the earth living in Linesville would be to want to get baptized? So Chrissy gets on the phone and calls him. And he's down in Nashville. She says, who do you think would be the last person that you would ever think would give their heart to Christ and want to be baptized? He didn't even hesitate. He said, Mike. Mike. So it came the day for the baptism right here. I remember stepping down into this pool. I stepped right down into here. I was about right here. And he's right here. And the people are clapping, and he whispers in my ear just before I baptized him. He said, Pastor Art, please be careful with my back. When you put your hand on my back, be careful. I said, why? He said, because years ago I had the name Satan tattooed all down my back in great big letters, S-A-T-A-N. And this week, before I got baptized, I went to the tattoo place, and I said, I want you to remove Satan from my back. I'm getting baptized on Sunday. This man was raw from that tattoo removal. Can you imagine that? You get a little tattoo removed, get this whole back. I put him down in the water, come up. I can't hardly think of a more emotional moment than that for me. And then I went on to have the privilege of marrying him and his wife. And they have since moved on. They live over near Cleveland now, many years ago. But that is a testimony, folks, to the faithfulness of God's people in this church. And I'll give you one last little story. And he's here tonight, Francis Gillette. Whom I understand happens to be our oldest member. I believe he's 95 years old. That's longevity. Nod your head if that's, yeah, okay. He's a little hard of hearing, but Bill will fill him in a little later. This man I hold in the highest of esteem. Years ago, I get a phone call at 11 o'clock at night in the old parsonage, and it's Francis calling me from Greenville Hospital. And he said, Pastor, I need you to get down here. I think this is my last night on earth. So I got my car and I went down, and he was in bad shape. And I prayed with him, and I left. The next morning, it was about 6:45 or so in the morning, my phone rings, and honestly, I thought for sure it was going to be somebody telling me bad news. But it wasn't. It was Francis calling me. And there for a moment, I thought maybe he's calling me from heaven. But he said, no, I'm still here. He said, your prayer must have worked. And that was so many years ago. And then a few years later, at that time, he's about 70 years old, and I'm around 50. And we go to the Dominican Republic. He goes on a mission trip. We go on a mission trip together. And we're down here working. And I'm 50, and he's 70. And man, he's outworking me like you wouldn't believe. And I preached down there, and we worked together. And so now you fast forward to about 2-3 years ago, he was down in Guatemala for another mission trip in his 90s. And so I'm talking to my son Matthew and Christine, who all happen to also be down there. And they said, here, we'll put Francis on the phone. So Francis gets on the phone. Hello? I said, Francis, man, here you are on a mission trip again. Yep. I said, hey, do you remember the time when I preached down there and this big spider was behind me while I was preaching? Nobody was listening to me. They were all pointing at the spider. This thing was huge. And I turned around and looked at it, and my sermon, it was about 5 minutes. That was it. So next time you invite me to speak, you just need to get a big spider. So, man, so memorable. You know, so I said, hey, do you remember that? He goes, no. I said, you're kidding me. Francis, you don't remember that? He goes, well, Pastor, you know, not all of your sermons were that memorable. Yeah, you all clap. Well, Francis, I'm sure that's true. But I'll tell you what has been memorable for Christy and me is to spend this almost 40 years with you wonderful folks, this wonderful church. And I tell you, the years have really gone by. I keep looking up there, and I wonder who some of them people are, but I guess it was us back then. So, how am I doing? So, with what little time that I don't have left, I just want to end with this little book. It's burned a bit. This is my minister's manual that survived the fire. Some of you people are in here. Your marriages, your baptisms, your dedications of your children. Maybe you were dedicated. Well, if it's a funeral, you're not in here. Okay, I mean, you're still here, but I looked through this today, and I started down the list of the people that I buried from day one when I came, and I couldn't help but think, they were the faithful. Every one of them. And I miss them. You miss them? You got people you miss? You wish we're still sitting right beside you here tonight, don't you? You wish they could have been here for this celebration. Maybe it's your mom, your dad, your brother, sister. But somebody that you remember tonight who had such an impact upon your life. And that's why you are here today, in great part. But I've got some really good news for you from Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. And it says, we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Do you realize that everybody that passed on in this church from 1851 until the last one here that's passed on so far is surrounding us tonight in this cloud of witnesses? And I want you to think of that one right now that made such an impact on your life. And why don't you just clap your hands for them and give a praise for them. There's going to be another celebration in 25 years. I'm not coming. You're going to get somebody else. But I'm going to be there in that cloud, keeping my eye on some of you. Thank you so much from Christy's heart and my heart to all of your hearts. Thank you for the honor and the privilege that we have had to serve with you in this church, this great church. God bless you all. We love you. Thank you.